are in, actually I think we're in the end of Acts 20, if you want to go there. I'm going to briefly recap. So here's Assos, one of the areas that they went through as they are traveling. And you'll see here, as Paul's wrapping up his third missionary journey, they left Troas, they went to Assos, then Mytilene. Then it says we landed opposite Chios, right here. They went to Samos and Miletus. And who did he meet at Miletus? The Ephesian elders, which Ephesus, you see, is just north of that. And I think that's right about where we left off last week, was their meeting, Paul's charge and encouragement and warning to the elders there at Miletus. Again, some of these pictures, I'll go through them quickly since we saw them last week. This is the coastline near Assos, sunset at Assos. There's Mytilene. There's the Chios harbor from the southwest. And there's the harbor. There's Samos and the harbor town of Pythagorio, I guess is how you say that. We talked about there being some discussion as to whether or not Paul sailed around Samos, around Cape Trogyllium, I guess you would say that, or whether or not he went through the Strait of Mykale. There was some discussion about that. I don't think we're ever going to really know, or that it really matters all that much. He went that way. There you can see Samos, a little bit closer shot. Here's Samos, and they don't know if he went through here or if he went around Samos and came around this way. I'm sure a lot of it had to do with, you know, they didn't have outboard motors back then, so they were relying on wind and sail, and I'm sure a lot of it depended on what direction the winds were coming from and how strong they were. But Miletus is down here, and nowadays it's no longer a coastal town. This is all silted up from the Meander River that is near there. And we see some pictures of this, I think, oops. That was mute. That was the wrong button. There we go. You can see some of this kind of a muddy, silt, watery, marshy area. That's the theater at Miletus. And you can see a lot more in the background here, this dirt and mud kind of piled up in the distance. Probably not. Probably not. It does seem interesting when we look at Ephesus and some of the other places we've seen. It's like Caesarea. They like to build theaters on the coast, I guess, so you get that. You're sitting there watching a show and you get this nice evening breeze blowing in off the ocean. It's probably really nice. Okay, we watched the movie about, the video about shepherding the church. I'm going to pass over that. And we left off right about here, where Paul's wrapping up his discussion with the Ephesian elders. So do you know physically where they are? Do you remember where they're meeting? They're at the end of 20. I think it said, does it say here? Maybe I'm thinking of another instance. Verse 17 says, now from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church to come to him. And then he has this discourse with them. What'd you say, Ina? Yeah, it's Miletus is the place. I was thinking that it actually said, maybe it's just my mind's eye. You got to watch out for your mind's eye sometimes, right? In my mind's eye, they're on the beach, but that later on, when they're at another location, they talk about them meeting on the beach. But in any case, he's meeting with the Ephesian elders. How did Paul provide for himself? When he says, I've worked with my hands. What was his job? What did he do? Tent maker, yeah.
To that point that you just made a few
Yeah,
You couldn't necessarily be on the beach, but you have to be close enough that that would be the next step. I mean, but of course, you could have been in town, in your house.
it's hard to say.
It's kind of suggestive.
Yeah, it's one of those.
It's not definitive, it's kind of
Yeah,
suggestive.
maybe that's where my mind was going, was that it felt like that's what they were saying goodbye from. But
Sorry, didn't mean
no, you're fine. So he was a tent maker. We learned that in Acts 18, back when we went through that passage. That's what he did. He worked for pay. If you could think of him perhaps as almost a vocational missionary. He had a job and he paid for himself. He didn't ask for money from the people that he was helping. And one of the reasons he did that was he liked to be able to give back. And he actually wraps up that section by quoting Jesus. He said, in all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way we must help the weak, and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said it is more blessed to give than to receive. Okay, let's read the end of the chapter here real quick, just a couple of verses. And when he had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all, and there was much weeping on the part of all. They embraced Paul and kissed him, being sorrowful most of all because of the word he had spoken, and that they would not see his face again. And they accompanied him to the ship. Okay, so what's he do with the Ephesian elders as he's getting ready to leave? What do they all do?
Pray.
They get down and pray. It says he knelt down, so they were on their knees, and he prayed with them all. They all said, "Hey, Paul, good to see you. Bye. Have a good time." What was the emotional mood of this scene? They were grieved. Yeah, they were sad, right? Mostly sad because of what did he say? You're never going to see me again. You're never going to see my face again. And that really upset them. They obviously were very close to Paul, and pretty emotional scene as he gets ready to board the ship. Okay, so they escort him to the ship, and that's the end of his time there at Miletus. So let's talk about a few application notes. So completing the good works God had prepared for Paul, and I'm thinking of that Ephesians 2:10 passage about preparing the good works that God has prepared beforehand for us, was most important to Paul, completing his mission. Is it the most important thing for us today? And if not, why not? Do you think we regard that mission as to the same level of importance that Paul did? Anybody?
I don't think so.
Paula says no.
I mean, it's important, but not like.
Yeah. I would say that just on the whole, as a fellowship, we want good things to happen, but I don't think we pursue it with the same intensity that Paul did. Paul was a really intense person, and you might make the argument that was Paul. He was charged by Jesus. He had this intensity about him, and there's really never been anybody else like him. And that would probably be an accurate statement, that, well, I can never be like Paul. But still, do we all recognize that we each have a mission, something that we need to accomplish? There's some way that God can use us, and we need to own that.
I think, Jeff, we've never faced the things that Paul faced. And the real test of whether we would feel like he has is whether or not we were really put to the test.
Yeah.
And I think that would really test our mettle.
Yeah. So Mike says that we haven't been tested in the same way that Paul has, and if we had been, that would be a real measure of our commitment. When I look at, and I won't mention the country, right, since we're streaming, But our brothers and sisters in Christ that are meeting today under threat, they feel that commitment. Because they know that when they meet that day, if somebody catches them, they face imprisonment, at a minimum, a beating, and possibly death. Yes?
I think sometimes when we look at people throughout the Bible that are examples to us, we got to allow ourselves a little bit of grace and mercy because we don't see Paul's every single waking moment of his life.
No.
We see his overall picture and his overall life. And so we have to look at our overall life and just kind of, there's moments probably in our life when we've done some really big things for God, right?
Yeah.
We might be some Pauls throughout our life in different moments,
Yeah.
right? Where we were standing up and we were being, those loud instruments. But then there's other times where just our everyday life has just been calm examples
Good.
of Christ. So
Different levels of experience and different ways that we engage through the seasons of our lives. So good. Good. Any other thoughts?
It's like the media, how we can get it out there. We don't have to get on a ship.
Yeah.
Shipwreck,
Yeah.
and on the TV.
Those of you that have had health scares, I'll call them health scares, right? You got a bad diagnosis, you had something pop up that you didn't expect to happen. Happens to us sometimes, right, Ina? It tends to raise the awareness of how little time you've got and how much you need to get done, and the fact that you really want to get that done while you still have the time. I know that that's had an impact on me. And you want to, when you see, perhaps that's why we are told, Lord, teach us to count the number of our days, right? To have that awareness, the time's running out. And if we're going to get something done, let's get it done. The notion that, well, I don't have enough time tonight. I don't really want to do it this week. Somebody else will take care of it. This kind of a, Paul never approached the situation like that. And you see the Christians that he worked with, they never approached the situation like that. They were committed. So if Paul has charged the elders with overseeing the church, and we saw that really good video by Dr. Manner last week about shepherding the church, what obligation does that place on the church? Is there any obligation for the church with regards to the shepherds? Let's go to Hebrews 13:7. Well, this is not the verse I was thinking of. Andy, you'll probably be able to help me out here. 7 says, remember your leaders. 17 is what I'm looking for. Did I copy that down wrong? Oh, no, I just didn't clean my glasses good enough this morning. They're both good verses, so let's read 7, yeah. Remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. So 7 encourages us to model, to follow the example of faith by our leaders. And then 17 says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. When the elders express concern or want to meet with you or want to encourage you or reach out to you to some way, how should you respond?
Openly.
I got the coffee on. I'll break out some cookies. Elders like cookies. You welcome them, right? Because they have your best interest at heart. And they want the best for you, and they are going to give an account for your souls, and they do want to encourage you. That's what their job is. And that closing phrase, otherwise it wouldn't be of any advantage to you. The way I kind of understand that in my own mind is, don't make their job difficult, right? Don't make it difficult for them to be your leaders. Cooperate. Work with them. They've been given an assignment, and so have you, to follow them, to encourage them. Yes, Andy.
The analogy of, it's like a shepherd, a sheep.
Yeah.
Sheep stay together and they follow the shepherd. If there's goats, the goats just wander all over the place.
Yeah.
I would say, be a good sheep and not be a goat.
Be a good sheep and don't be a goat. Okay. Which does not mean greatest of all time. The video that Dr. Manners showed was fascinating. I thought that he shared last week, how that shepherd was walking along, and all these sheep lined up and followed him from whatever location they were. They just got in line and stayed with him, and I thought that was really interesting. If Paul had always been a taker instead of a giver, how effective would his ministry had been? Would he have been effective, you think? Not nearly as much, no. He worked with his hands. He helped other people. It was of his nature to give. He wanted to care for people that were unfortunate. He talked more than once about how he was eager to help the poor. That was who Paul was. He was a giving person, and I think that came across, and it made people receptive to his message when they saw just what kind of a giving person he was. And I think that should resonate with us as well. We should be giving people. We should be open, and people should love to be around us. And it makes us attractive to them, and it also opens doors for sharing the gospel.
And Paul did more than just be a giver to evangelize. He was a huge mentor. Think of Titus and Timothy and
Yeah.
others that even Priscilla and Aquila. He was huge in giving to the other people of faith around him, and empowering them and equipping them and encouraging them as well.
So it wasn't
Just doing the evangelizing.
It wasn't just money. It was his time. Yeah.
His wisdom, his experience.
Yes. So Linda said, yes, he gave of himself. He mentored people. He encouraged them and led them along the way. Okay. We're going to go on. We're going to pick it up in Acts chapter 21. We've got about, 8 chapters left. And we're going to get through the rest of this. So here's a map of, I think I've put this together so that we can see. Here's Miletus right up here. So he's going to go to Kos, to Rhodes, to Patara, and then this big long, and I made sure that we got a scale here, right? So this is, I think it's just shy of 300 miles. It's a pretty good journey by sea. And I want us to see a little bit of what he would have seen if we were on his ship. So let's take a look at that. This is what they believe is the kind of ship that he would have been on. This is a smaller, we talked about this last week, on short hops in the United States with an airline, you take a commuter jet, which is a smaller jet. And generally, if you're taking a longer trip that's over water, you take a larger plane. Sometimes if you want to hear a good story, I'll share with you how I took a Cessna across part of the Atlantic, which was not an exciting trip. You want a big plane when you're flying over the ocean. So they're on a small, most likely on a small coastal traveling ship as they're bouncing between the islands and the coast there. This is a larger ship. This is from the National Maritime Museum at Haifa. And this is a larger Roman merchant ship from the 1st century. You'll notice it has a larger hold, more capacity, a larger sail. This is probably a ship like this that they would have taken from Patara on down to Tyre later that we'll look at. Okay, let's look at this video about Miletus to Caesarea. Did I freeze that somehow? Jim, is that not going to play? There it is.
Chapter 21 begins with Paul's departure from Miletus as he says goodbye to the elders at Ephesus, and he makes his way eventually to Jerusalem. We're going to trace right now part of that travel from Miletus to Caesarea. Much of it is just consumed with going here and there and so forth and so on, but we need to look at some of the places that are referred to. When we had parted from them and had set sail, we ran a straight course to Kos, and the next day to Rhodes, and from there to Patara, and having found a ship crossing over to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. When we came in sight of Cyprus, leaving it on the left, we kept sailing to Syria and landed at Tyre, for there the ship was to unload its cargo. And then verses 7 and 8. When we had finished the voyage from Tyre, we arrived at Ptolemais, and after greeting the brethren, we stayed with them for a day. On the next day we left and came to Caesarea, and entering the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, we stayed with him. The reference to Rhodes is rather interesting. If you visit Rhodes today, on the east side of the island, they will often point out this cove that is here and refer to it as the Bay of St. Paul. The probability of that being where the ship stops is pretty slim. More likely, it stops on the northern tip of the island, which would have been the location of the ancient Colossus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Now, there's little doubt that Paul would have at least seen this as they traveled by, but this is a huge bronze statue that was built before Christ and is destroyed in the 3rd century AD by an earthquake. And the image often shows it straddling the harbor entrance, but more likely it was probably a statue that was on the top of the hill, now the location of the palace of the Grand Marshal. But again, Paul likely would have seen this. Makes no reference to it whatsoever, but sort of a geographic point of reference. As they make their way further, they eventually arrive at Tyre. Now, Tyre is one of those ancient towns that's referred to on a number of occasions in the Old Testament. Not often in the New, but it plays some significant role in the unfolding of the history of the area of Canaan and so forth. Originally, as we look at this map, you see that there's an isthmus here and a small bulge at the left end of this. Originally, this was an island separated from the mainland. And Alexander the Great is going to come here and capture the city of Tyre, which was a rather significant shipping magnet of the ancient world. And he builds a causeway to cross over from the mainland to the island. And by that means, he's going to capture the island. Now, over a period of time, because of sand movement and the sea currents and everything else, the little causeway has built into an isthmus, and that's what we're looking at. And the harbor that Paul would have stopped at is on the north side of this. Then they're going to travel to the city of Ptolemais. And Ptolemais is now in what we would call Israel, and it was part of basically Palestine during the time of Paul's existence and Jesus' ministry and so forth. And it's on that northern edge of the Bay of Haifa. Haifa was not the main port of the time, basically wasn't a port at all. The port would have been Ptolemais. In the Old Testament, this is a town known as Akko. But in the New Testament, it's referred to merely as Ptolemais because in the 3rd century BC, Ptolemy comes along and he renames it after himself. And again, as you look at this Google Map satellite image, you can see the remnant of the port on the southern flank of the curve of the landmass as it comes around. And this would have been the port where Paul would have landed. And as you visit the site today, you can see part of the breakwater associated with that. He stays here briefly and then makes his way with the group down to Caesarea. Caesarea is further south. This is a town that Herod the Great has established as a port to rival that of the Athenians, of Piraeus in particular. It's going to play a significant role in the life of Paul from this point, but here's again a Google Map satellite view of the area. And if you look very carefully, you can see this dark shadowy section that extends to the left beyond the parts that are fairly clear associated with the land. That's part of the remnant of the old harbor that Herod the Great built. And as you visit the site today, this is the harbor that you can see. It's much smaller than it was in the time of Paul. But Caesarea is going to become a very significant site in the life of Paul. And he's going to, this basically is his last point of freedom before he's imprisoned, and then eventually makes his way to Rome for his hearing before Caesar.
That's fascinating. So I was able to find some additional photos through Dr. Boland's collection at BiblePlaces.com, and I wanted to share some of those with you too. But let's start with the reading of Acts 21, the first 6 verses. And when he had parted from them and set sail, we came by a straight course to Cos, and the next day to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. And having found a ship crossing to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. When we had come in sight of Cyprus, leaving it on the left, we sailed to Syria and landed at Tyre, for there the ship was to unload its cargo. And having sought out the disciples, we stayed there for 7 days. And through the Spirit, they were telling Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. When our days there were ended, we departed and went on our journey, and they all, with wives and children, accompanied us until we were outside the city. And kneeling down on the beach, we prayed and said farewell to one another. Then we went on board the ship, and they returned home. Okay, so where was their first stop? There in verse 1. We departed Miletus, and they took a straight course to Cos. Okay. And where'd they go next and when? Rested up. Next day they went to Rhodes. And from there they went to Patara. Okay. And it says there, in verse 2, and having found a ship crossing to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. Now, why might they have changed ships? Several different reasons. Probably needed a bigger ship. Why else? I mean, that's kind of the obvious. Yeah, that's right. I mean, they needed a ship that was going that direction, right? So from that northern side of the Mediterranean Sea, around Patara, they needed a ship that was headed that direction because they wanted to get to Jerusalem. So they jumped this ship. What kind of a ship was it? We learned a little bit later. It's a cargo ship, right? They got a load of cargo. And it said it was bound for Phoenicia. If you look at a map, that same map we looked at a moment ago, we'll look a little bit more closely. That's where Tyre would have been, and that's where they were going to land. Okay. When they landed, verse 4, who did they look for? I'm sorry? For the disciples, yeah. So they looked for people connected with the church. They looked for believers, and they found them there. What had the Spirit told these disciples to tell Paul? Don't go there. don't go there. I find this interesting that the Spirit was guiding these people to tell him not to go there, and Paul, filled with the Spirit, was going there. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? But, and maybe it was just how they understood it, right? Maybe the Spirit was guiding them and saying, Paul will face great dangers, and to them, their response was, he shouldn't go there because he's going to face great dangers. Paul also understood that the good was going to come of this, and I think that's part of why he wanted to complete his mission, was he had a little, perhaps deeper understanding of what was ahead. So when it was time to leave, who escorted Paul's group to the beach? What did they do? They're in verse 5. It wasn't just the elders, right? And they all, with wives and children, accompanied him to the beach, and kneeling down the beach, we prayed. And they escorted him to the ship. And they went on back home. There's the beach I was thinking of. Yeah, I guess stuck in my head. Yeah, they knelt down on the beach, prayed together, told Paul goodbye, and he left. This is the harbor at Kos. These all look like beautiful places, don't they? Now, here's that St. John's Bay that Dr. Manor was talking about. And doesn't look so much like a bay as like a really expensive tourist trap, because I see all the beach umbrellas, and, you know, this is, I can see why people might think it would be a good sheltered spot, but it's pretty small and pretty narrow. But this just looks like beachgoers. And he said it was probably not this location. Dr. Boland said the same thing, that it was probably not here. It was probably here. And this is the harbor at Rhodes. That picture that he was showing of Colossus, which was one of the 7 wonders of the world, of the ancient world, I need to go back and look at it again, because I think Dr. Boland's notes said that it was built in the 3rd century BC. It stood for 50 years until an earthquake knocked it down, and the pieces were probably there for a long, long time. And Paul probably saw the pieces of the Colossus, but that it was not there. So Dr. Manor said it was built in 300 AD. And then we also saw this message, or this information about it being built in 300 BC. So I'm not sure when it was. If you look at, and we'll look here in just a second, if you look at Google Maps, it shows this as the pedestal, the location where it would have been. And Dr. Manor said that apparently the Grand Marshal of this area lives in this palace right now. They've kind of apparently refurbed that, but this is on that edge of that harbor. Let me see if I got another shot. So this is another artist's conception of what that might have looked like. This would have been the Colossus. It was 108 feet tall, I think it was. Really a large bronze statue. And here's that aerial view. So the Colossus would have been right here, and here's the harbor at Rhodes. This is the ancient city in the harbor at Patara. You can see the Mediterranean out over this way in the distance. I thought this was interesting. So this is an ancient lighthouse at Patara. They did have lighthouses back then. I don't know what they lit them with, because you would not have had a whole lot of illumination power from just a flame. This is the southern coast of Cyprus. So it says that they passed Cyprus on which side? Remember? Passed it on the left. So this is, they would have been sailing along over here. Well, what am I doing? I did it again. They would have been sailing along over here, and this is Cyprus on the left. This is a colonnaded street there in Tyre, so you can see the ocean in the distance there, the Mediterranean Sea. And this is the beach at Tyre. This was taken as part of that American Colony series that BiblePlaces.com has, and I think this is from the early 1900s or late 1800s. So it probably looks a whole lot more like, he had a picture of modern Tyre, and it's hard to imagine anybody on the beach with all these big, giant hotels and stuff there. This, you can imagine people walking up on the beach, kneeling down to pray, and then seeing a ship off. Okay, we have 3 minutes. Let's keep reading along here. Let's pick up in verse 7. When we had finished the voyage from Tyre, we arrived at Ptolemais and greeted our brothers and stayed with them for 1 day. On the next day, we departed and came to Caesarea, and we entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. While we stayed for many days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. And coming to us, he took Paul's belt and bound his own feet and hands and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, this is how the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles." When we heard this, we and all the people urged him not to go up to Jerusalem. Then Paul answered, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be imprisoned, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." And since he would not be persuaded, we ceased and said, "Let the will of the Lord be done." Okay. So where'd they go after leaving Tyre? Verse 7, Ptolemais, which was also called, remember he mentioned it in the Old Testament, it was called Akko. And I think in my Bible it says AKKO. Nowadays it's ACCO. So you may see both spellings. But they went to Ptolemais, or Akko. And where'd they go after leaving Ptolemais? Verse 8. Caesarea. Okay. What do we learn about Philip's daughters? Philip the evangelist. Unmarried. Well, it says he was one of the 7. Yeah. So we go back to the earlier reading in Acts that talks about, please select 7 men from among you. He must have been one of the 7. And he had 4 daughters, right? Were they married? Unmarried. And what do we learn about them? They prophesied. And I thought it'd be worth, how am I doing here? 15 seconds. So I wanted to touch on that word. It means to serve as an interpreter of divine will or purpose, and futurity may or may not be indicated. This is from the BDAG, a Greek lexicon. It means to proclaim an inspired revelation, to tell about something that is hidden from view, to tell or reveal, or to foretell something that lies in the future, foretell or prophesy. So telling the future is not necessarily part of prophesying. We're going to have to stop here because of time, and we'll pick it up here next week and kind of talk about this a little bit more. Thank you all for your comments.